Serafina had spent 2 years folding herself small. She had learned which silences to keep, which rooms to leave when certain people entered, and which version of herself was easiest for Daemon Blackthorne to be around. She had not done this on purpose. It had happened the way most quiet damage happens, slowly, gently, so gradually that by the time she noticed, it felt like personality rather than loss. She told herself she was patient. She told herself good things took time. She told herself that a man like Daemon, Alpha King of the Northern Packs, powerful and calculating, and surrounded at every moment by people who wanted something from him, could not simply announce his feelings in public. It was not how kings operated. She understood that. She respected that. What she had not understood, until the night of the Iron Vale Summit, was that some men do not announce their feelings in public because they do not have any. She wore the burgundy dress, the one he had once touched at the sleeve and said, quietly, that it suited her. She had remembered that compliment for months, the way people remember the first warm day after a long winter. Small, but proof that warmth existed at all. She wore it to the summit the way someone carries a lucky coin, not because she truly believed in luck, because letting go of it felt worse. The grand hall of Iron Vale was full when she arrived. 200 wolves from across every major pack, dressed in their best, seated at long tables beneath iron chandeliers. The room smelled of oak wood and candle smoke, and the particular tension that always gathered when kings sat in the same space and tried to appear relaxed. Sarah entered on the arm of her pack's beta, a courtesy that meant nothing beyond formality. She was not high-ranked. She held no political title. She had no reason to be nervous, except that she was, and no reason to hope, except that she did. She found Daemon's eyes across the room without trying. That was the thing about 2 years of quiet devotion. She always knew exactly where he was standing. He looked away first. She told herself it meant nothing. He was a king at a summit. He was busy. He was managing a room full of politics and pride and old rivalries wrapped in polite conversation. Looking away first did not mean anything. She sat down at her table. She poured herself a glass of water. She listened to the conversation around her and smiled at the right moments, and did not allow herself to look back at him more than twice. The banquet proceeded the way these things always did, slowly at first, then all at once. Courses were served. Alliances were discussed in careful, indirect language. Alphas laughed too loudly at each other's jokes. Betas leaned in and whispered. The chandeliers burned warm above all of it, and for a while, Serafina almost relaxed. Then Daemon stood up. Standing at a summit banquet meant an announcement. Everyone in the room understood this immediately. The conversation softened, then stopped. 200 wolves turned toward the Alpha King of the Northern Packs, who straightened his jacket and let the silence build with the ease of a man who had never once doubted that rooms would quiet for him. He spoke clearly. His voice carried without effort. He announced a union, a formal bonding between himself and Yvette Ashford, daughter of the Eastern Alpha, a political match of significant strategic value, he said, a bond that would unite 2 of the continent's strongest packs and secure their borders for the next generation. The applause began immediately, polite, measured, the kind of applause that summits produced, not warm but correct. Serafina did not clap. Her hands were in her lap. Her wine glass was untouched. She sat very still and understood, in the way that the body understands things before the mind catches up, that something she had been quietly building for 2 years had just been quietly demolished in front of 200 witnesses who did not even know what they had watched fall. She breathed slowly. She kept her face composed. She was very good at this by now. Then the woman beside her, a beta's wife she barely knew, leaned slightly toward her companion and whispered, not quietly enough, wasn't she his? And Daemon, from across the room, as if some instinct in him sensed the thread of rumor beginning to form, looked directly at Serafina. The room had not fully returned to conversation yet. Enough people were still watching him. Enough eyes were still turned his way. And he said, with the same clear, carrying voice he had used for his announcement, "Let it be known that I hold no mate bond, no claim, and no prior connection to any unmated she-wolf in this hall. What is unclaimed remains unclaimed." He did not say her name. He did not need to, because he had looked at her when he said it. and now everyone else was looking at her too. There are certain moments in a person's life that split time cleanly into before and after. Serafina would spend a long time, in the weeks that followed, understanding that this was one of them. But in the moment itself, she did not think about before or after. She thought about her hands. She thought about keeping them still. She thought about the fact that 60 or 70 people were watching her face, and she would not, she absolutely would not, give any of them what they were waiting for. She picked up her wine glass and set it down again, not because she wanted wine, but because the motion gave her hands something to do, and gave her brain half a second to arrange itself. Then she stood up. She smoothed her dress. She turned to the beta beside her, and gave him a small, composed nod, the kind that said, "I am fine. Do not make a scene on my behalf. I have this under control." And she walked toward the exit of the grand hall. Every step was even. Her heels clicked softly on the stone floor. She looked straight ahead. She did not hurry. Hurrying would have looked like running, and she was not running. She was simply leaving. The hall was almost completely silent as she crossed it. She pushed open the side door and stepped through it, and then the cold air of the corridor hit her, and she kept walking, because stopping felt dangerous, and the corridor led to the terrace, and the terrace was outside, and outside meant no one could watch her face anymore. She made it to the stone railing before her breathing changed. The Iron Vale Terrace overlooked a wide valley. The sun was still well above the horizon, golden and unhurried, completely indifferent to what had just happened inside. The sky was the kind of pale orange that looks painted. Under different circumstances, she might have found it beautiful. She gripped the railing and looked at the valley and breathed. She was not crying. She wanted to be very clear with herself about that, even though there was no one present to be clear with. She was not crying. She was just breathing harder than usual, and her chest felt like something had been pressed against it, and her eyes were warmer than normal, but she was not crying. She was simply standing on a terrace and deciding, one breath at a time, what kind of woman she was going to be about this. She did not hear him approach. He was large enough that most people heard him coming, but he moved quietly, the way people move when they are genuinely trying not to startle someone. She knew it was not Damon before she saw him. Damon's presence always felt like being watched. This felt different. This felt like being stood beside. She did not turn around. "You do not have to do this," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Whatever this is." "I know," he said. He did not explain himself further. He simply stood there, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be present, looking at the same valley she was looking at. She could see him in her peripheral vision, broad through the shoulders, a jaw that looked like it had been set against a great many things over the years, a scar along the left side of his neck that she had noticed at previous summits and never had a reason to think about. Callum Draven, Alpha King of the Southern Packs, a man she had exchanged perhaps 30 words with in her entire life, all of them formal, all of them brief. "Then why are you here?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not the kind of quiet that means someone is stalling, the kind that means someone is choosing words carefully because they want them to be true. "Because my wolf recognized you 7 months ago," he said. "At the spring summit, you were standing near the east window and arguing with your pack's beta about something, and you were losing the argument, and you knew it, and you were furious about it. And I stood there and thought, there she is." I, Serafina, said nothing. "I did not approach you," he continued, "because it appeared you were already connected to someone. I am not a man who moves toward what belongs to someone else. I waited. I watched from a distance, and I kept my distance." He paused. He made it very clear tonight that nothing belonged to anyone. "So I stopped waiting." She turned and looked at him then, fully, directly, in a way she had not permitted herself before. He met her gaze without shifting, without performing, without filling the silence with anything unnecessary. "I am not an easy man," he said. "I will not tell you otherwise. My pack is large, and my responsibilities are constant, and I am better at being straightforward than I am at being soft." He said it the way someone states a fact about geography, not apologetically, but honestly. "What I can tell you is this. I will not stand in a room of 200 people and pretend I do not know your name. I will not hold you close in private and release you in public. That is the one thing I can promise you without hesitation." Serafina looked at him for a long moment. The sun was lower now, but still above the horizon. The light had gone from gold to something deeper, a warm amber that turned the valley below into a painting. "I do not know you," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "you do not. You are asking me to trust a stranger." "I am asking you to take my hand," he said, and extended it toward her. Steady, open, unhurried. Everything else comes after. She looked at his hand. She had spent 2 years reaching for someone who kept moving slightly out of reach. She knew what that felt like, the constant low-grade uncertainty of it, the way it made her second-guess her own instincts, the exhausting work of convincing herself that almost was enough. This hand was not moving. She thought about the burgundy dress. She thought about the way Damon had looked directly at her when he made sure the whole room understood she was nothing. She thought about the 2 years of quiet dinners and careful silences, and being held without a title. And she thought about how she had worn his favorite color to this summit, like an offering to someone who did not consider himself in her debt. She thought about the woman she had been walking across that hall, head up, steps even, not running, and she decided that woman deserved better than standing on a cold terrace alone while the man who had just humiliated her celebrated inside. She took Callum's hand. The bond settled over her like warmth after cold, not explosive, not the crashing force she had read about in old pack stories, but something quieter and more certain, like a key turning in a lock that had always been there. Her wolf, who had been silent and cautious for so long, went very still, and then exhaled. It felt like recognition. It felt like arriving somewhere she had not known she was traveling toward. Callum's hand closed around hers. He looked at her with an expression she would take a long time to fully read, something between relief and resolution, as if he had been carrying something heavy for several months, and had only now been permitted to set it down. They stood like that for a moment, looking at the valley, while the sun finished its descent. Then he said, simply, "Are you ready to go back in?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Neither am I," he said, "but we are going anyway." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it was the first one in hours that did not cost her anything. They walked back into the grand hall together. His hand moved to the small of her back as they crossed the threshold, not possessively, not dramatically, simply the way someone places a hand on the back of a person they intend to stand beside. The room noticed. Rooms always notice. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes moved. Damon noticed. Callum pulled out her chair. He sat beside her. He did not make a speech. He did not look across the room at anyone. He simply poured water into her glass and resumed the evening, as though the world had already caught up to the fact of them, because as far as he was concerned, it had. Serafina sat straight in her chair. She did not look at Damon. She did not need to. She reached for her water glass and found that her hand had stopped trembling. 3 months later, Callum named her Luna of the Southern Pax, at a gathering that held nearly twice as many witnesses as the Iron Vale Summit. He spoke her full name, Serafina Voss Draven, slowly, without rush, as if he wanted every syllable to reach every corner of the room. It was not a correction of anything. It was not a statement directed at anyone. It was simply a man telling the world the name of the woman standing beside him, because he saw no reason in the world to do otherwise. Serafina cried that night, alone, in the room they now shared, after the celebration had quieted and the guests had gone. Not from pain, not from relief, exactly. From the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being known, fully, publicly, without condition. She had spent 2 years being someone's quiet secret. She spent the rest of her life being someone's certainty. And the difference, she would later say, was everything.